I'm doing a couple of soft hackles today, but these are soft hackles essentially that I've already done. A number of weeks ago I did a Partridge Yellow, and the sisters to that are the Partridge Orange and Partridge Green. Now I'm doing a Partridge Orange and a Partridge Green today, but I wanted to show a little bit different variation of it. And that's primarily because you don't have to have the silk or even the partridge to do this particular fly. I suppose it wouldn't be a partridge if it didn't have the partridge in it, but technically speaking, you really don't. The traditional patterns were tied using silks because that's what they had. They did not have, modern nylons or polyesters or other synthetic threads and flosses and things that we have these days. So they used the silk. And that's fine if you want to be traditional to do it that way, but I get a lot of questions from followers and people who are interested will ask me about substituting materials if they don't have a silk, or if they don't have a dubbing, or if they don't have this or that. What I wanted to show you today is that you can tie the Partridge and Orange, the Partridge Green, and the Partridge Yellow just by simply using some thread and or some other floss substitute. So this is just a couple of quick and dirty, I don't want to say dirty, but this is just a couple of quick, simple, easy variations on tying the Partridge and Orange, Partridge and Green, and ultimately Partridge and Yellow. So we'll get started. I'm going to start the first of these two different Partridge soft hackles. This is going to be a Partridge and Orange. This is a Mustad 3906B, size 14. I'm going to debarb the hook. As I mentioned before, these both are going to be tied just a little bit different than the Partridge and Yellow, which I've already done. I'm using just a regular, this is a Danville 6/0 in an orange, and I'm just using a regular orange for the Partridge and Orange instead of like a silk thread. And the reason is it's quick and dirty. A lot of people don't have the silks, the Pearsalls or whatever, they're harder to find. This is just a way to show you can do whether it's a Partridge and Orange, a Partridge and Green, or even a Partridge and Yellow in just another fashion. I'm going to attach my thread right behind the eye of the hook and run it down about an eye length. Now, the part of the reason I'm using the Danville is because you can flatten this thread out. You may not be able to see it on the camera, but there are twists in this. It has a right-hand twist to it, and every time you wrap around as a right-handed tire, you're putting a 1/2 clockwise twist in the thread. But to get a nice, smooth, even body, which is what I'm looking for, I'm just going to give this a little bit of a counterclockwise spin, and that will flatten that thread out. Now I'll start wrapping down, nice touching turns, taking my time. As you get down a little bit, as I said, you're going to be putting in a clockwise twist in the thread as you wrap around as a right-handed tire. And even a left-handed tire would untwist the thread, but then begin to start putting more counterclockwise twists in it. When I get down to just past the point of the hook, which is going to be the length of my body, I'm just going to start wrapping back forward. Stop when I get about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. As you can see, this just gives me a nice, consistent, flat body. If you want something a little thicker, you could go down again. You could also use, say, a 3/0 thread or, say, 140 denier thread to give you a little bit thicker body, but you have to be careful if you use a thicker thread, because when we put the hackle in right now, it's very easy to put too many wraps in and bulk up the head of the fly. I'm using Hungarian partridge, as the fly implies. I'm taking actually some of the browner hackles from more on the back of the skin. They don't have to be super long for these. I don't mind them going back to the bend of the hook, but I don't want them to be much longer than that. So that would be good right there. I'm going to strip away the excess fibers. You have to be careful with these because you can very easily break the stems on these, the rachis, if you go pulling on these fibers too much. So with the tip prepared, I will use my small hackle pliers to grab the very tip here and then stroke these fibers back. Again, I only want 1 or 2 turns of that around the hook shank. Generally, they're much sparser than some other soft hackles. So then I will trim away what I don't need, just leaving myself a little triangle. Notice that my thread is at least an eye length or so behind. A lot of your partridge and yellow, partridge and orange, and partridge and green are tied with the hackle a little bit further back from the eye and a little bit longer head on these. Taking my hackle pliers, I'll stroke these fibers back and wrap that in. Being careful not to move the hackle back down the hook shank or too far up the hook shank. Just wrap it right in where it was tied and the other wrap right in front of it. Now here, notice that I am going to wrap forward, trapping that rachis in, and then I'm going to fold it back to create the head of the fly. I'm not really building it up, I just want it to be a little bit longer. And then I'll put in 5-turn whip finish, create the head, and then I can remove the thread and I can pop away the rest of that. Part of the reason why I tied it in and then wrapped forward, wrapping that rachis in as opposed to just folding it back and wrapping back, is these hackles, they're kind of squished down now, but really you want them to be able to fluff back out, and when this is swimming in the water, you want them sticking out much more perpendicular like this. If I were to wrap back on top of them, I would be wedging them down in more of a horizontal orientation, and they would follow more or less the hook shank and the body as opposed to sticking out kind of like your more traditional spiders. So that's the orange, or I should say that's the partridge in orange. You could certainly use a floss body if you want to on this. I've even seen some of these where people tie them with a tinsel rib, similar to the orange fish hawk, which I did a while ago. But that's a down and dirty, real quick partridge in orange, just using tying thread and a hackle. So now I'm going to show you another partridge in green. It's just a little bit different. You could certainly do the same thing with some tying thread if you want. I did not put head cement on that, but normally I would. Just kind of focused on the next fly here. Using the same hook, this is a 3906B in size 14. Debarb that. In this case, I'm using a Chartreuse Danville 6.0. If you don't want it to be such a bright green, you could certainly use just a regular kind of a green, a Uni 8/0 or something like that. I'm going for more of a bright body and a bright flight. I'm going to use some Chartreuse, fluorescent Chartreuse Glo-Brite for the body on this. You could certainly, again, do this with just some rayon floss if you want to. Again, attaching my thread right behind the eye of the hook and getting it back down about a hook shank, about an eye width down the hook shank. I'm going to take my Glo-Brite and I'm going to pull out, maybe about 10 or 12 inches of it. And then I'm going to double this over. And this is just to give me a little bit more material as I'm wrapping this in, but otherwise you could look at this almost like a two-strand floss or something. I'm going to tie this in. You could also run your thread down to the end of the shank and tie this in and then come back up if you want. But I'm going to tie this in right along the hook shank here. And then I'm not going to, I could flatten my thread if I want, but I'm just going to run my thread down. Touching turns are fairly close as I get down to the end of the shank, which is going to be just between the point and the barb of the hook. Here I will untwist my thread just a little bit, because when I come forward with that flatter thread, it will kind of fill in those gaps just a little bit and smooth it off. So when I palmer the Glo-Brite on, it'll just be a little bit smoother. Stopping about an eye length behind the eye of the hook, just like on the Partridge and Orange. I'll then take my Glo-Brite and do the same things you would with a floss. I'm going to stroke this all down on that first wrap, getting all those fibers in the same direction so that as I wrap this in, it just gives me a nice smooth body and I don't have any fibers going stray on me. I'm going to tie that in. Secure it, trim away the waste. Now using essentially the same feathers from the same area on the back of this partridge, I will strip away the excess on this feather. See how long those are. Those are a little bit longer than I like. So just take your time, get these out. Grabbing the tip with my hackle pliers, I'll stroke these back, slide these back. And that's about all I really want right there. I don't want, like I said, a large bushy collar on this. I will trim away the excess on that tip, leave myself just an anchor to tie in. Like the Partridge and Orange, I'm tying that in a good eye length behind the eye of the hook and wrapping down that tip as I tidy this up, go into the eye, and then come back up. I'm only going to get a wrap or two in there, and I don't want to have my head pile up on that hackle and wedge it in a backward orientation. So as you can see, I just get a couple, not even a full 2 wraps in there. Anchor the rachis down. Here you can see I'm wrapping forward toward the eye to bind in that rachis. I'll fold it back, come to the eye of the hook, and just wrap enough to cover everything up and give it a consistent look and color. Five-turn whip finish or so. And then the rest of that rachis will pop right off. Again, these hackles are tied in such a way that, especially when this gets wet, they'll all tend to separate and then come out more perpendicular to the hook shank, but they're not, the thread's not piled on them to wedge them down along the hook shank in a rearward orientation. Head cement on both sides of that. That is your Partridge in Green, or I should say Partridge in Chartreuse. That's a couple of ways. The Partridge in Orange, Partridge in Yellow, and Partridge in Green are just old soft hackle patterns. You don't have to have the silks for these. You can use some of the modern materials that we have and do something different. Like I said, put a rib on this. Maybe use 2 different colors of Glo-Brite just to, change it up a little bit, but have a little fun with it. Even if you don't have the partridge, use just a speckled hen or something like that. But that's a couple of different versions and variations of the popular Partridge soft hackles. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining me at Device today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.